Next on Newsmax Prime, the aftermath of Iowa. Ted Cruz wins a contentious Republican competition. Donald Trump trumpets his number 2 finish in somewhat muted fashion. And did bronze really turn to gold? Marco Rubio exceeds expectations, getting a boost from the establishment echo chamber. So it's on to New Hampshire. Now Granite State voters get the chance to prove the Iowa results are not cast in stone. But what about your choice? We'll tell you what you've told us about your right candidate as Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening and welcome to Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, Iowa and its aftermath. As Miranda Kahn reports, the Republican caucuses result in grassroots triumph, polls proven wrong, and the establishment managing expectations.
JD, Ted Cruz didn't exactly cruise to victory, but a boost from evangelicals and the conservative grassroots gave the Texas senator a hard-fought win.
Tonight is a victory for courageous conservatives across Iowa and all across this great nation. Tonight, the state of Iowa has spoken.
Donald Trump doesn't like losing, and last night a humbled first-time candidate tried to find a silver lining in his second-place finish.
We finished second, and I want to tell you something. I'm just honored. I'm really honored. And I want to congratulate Ted, and I want to congratulate all of the incredible candidates, including Mike Huckabee, who's become a really good friend of mine. So congratulations to everybody. I want to thank all of the folks that worked with us. We had a great team, and we will continue to have a great team. And we're just so happy with the way everything worked out.
Marco Rubio finished just a percentage point behind Trump, but the reactions of the two were poles apart. While the Donald did his best to hide his disappointment, the Florida senator was exuberant.
I am grateful to you, Iowa. You believed in me when others didn't think this night would be possible. When perhaps we were lost in the daily narrative. When some suggested that perhaps it was time to step aside, you believed in me. You walked with us. You made the calls and knocked on doors. You made a huge difference tonight. We are going to be back. Because when I'm our nominee, we are going to win Iowa, and we are going to win this election for this country.
Pretty pleased with that bronze win. As for the Democrats, the results were literally up in the air. 6 precinct wins went to Hillary Clinton via coin toss. Mrs. Clinton was officially declared the winner early this afternoon, the former Secretary of State edging Bernie Sanders by 0.2%.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised to see Bernie Sanders dispute this whole thing, because it is really curious, Miranda. I mean, let's just take a look at this. Now, I'm no math major, but when you see the results, just take a look at this. 0.2%, missing caucus goers, people restored after the fact. We made note of it last night. It's called the Democratic Party, but at times it seems to employ less than democratic procedures in terms of their selection. And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the Republicans as well. And here it is, Ted Cruz with that 28-24 victory over Donald Trump, with Marco Rubio in third at 23%. So you have that right there, and you see the others. For more on this story, we're pleased to be joined by Syndicated radio host Steve Deace. Steve, on the ground in Iowa, where he is an activist. He's also the author of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again. Thanks for being here on Newsmax Prime. Steve, you told us it was going to be Ted Cruz. Your reaction to your prediction coming true?
Not surprised. I predicted that Cruz would win 28-23. He won 28-24, so I apologize for being wrong. But I'm not surprised, but I'm very pleased. And I'm pleased because of the way that he won. And even though I vehemently disagree with Marco Rubio on immigration, I was pleased to see him challenge Donald Trump for second, because I think we've reached a stage in this process, JD, where Trump is really not running on anything other than Donald Trump. I mean, the only time he mentioned immigration the last couple of weeks in Iowa is when he said in a newspaper story, well, yeah, you know, people come to my rallies when they get bored. I just tell them we're going to build a fence. They cheer, yah, yah, yah. I mean, this has become the ultimate cult of personality. It's really the Republican Obama. It's for nothing other than him. And at least Rubio has some serious issues. I don't necessarily agree with him on a few of them, but at least he's running on some serious issues. So I was glad to see that Iowans decided to give a boost to candidates who actually want to run on something other than their own cult of personality and ego.
Steve, I want to go back to Ted Cruz. Many say today the key for him was the, quote, drop-off factor when supporters of Rand Paul, Mike Huckabee, and Dr. Ben Carson knew that their candidates could not win and may have gone to Cruz to trump Trump. Do you agree in that theory?
Well, that always happens in the caucuses, Miranda. That's how it works. I mean, you know, people ultimately want to vote for somebody they think is going to win. They want their vote to count. And so, I mean, if you're a conservative, you went in there. I mean, why do you care if Mike Huckabee gets 2% or 5%? He's not going to win. Why do you care if Rick Santorum gets 1% or 4%, or Ben Carson gets 7% or 10%? You want to vote for the person that you think is going to win. Pardon me. This is what happened for Rick Santorum to his advantage 4 years ago, happened to Mike Huckabee for his advantage, and it happened to Marco Rubio for his advantage. You look at where Chris Christie finished, where John Kasich finished. Their voters, Jeb Bush, went to the polls and said, hey, the only guy here that carries my message that has a chance is Marco Rubio, so I'm going to coalesce behind him. That's nothing new. That's the way the caucuses work. There's literally horse trading and campaigning that goes on right there at the caucus site.
Now, you warned us that the whole caucus process made it difficult to get accurate polling, and indeed, the Donald was leading in basically all the key polls, but the Opinion Savvy poll released Sunday and reported by Newsmax turned out to be the only major national poll to indicate that Trump might lose to Ted and that Rubio would come in very close in third place. Again, let's revisit polling in view of the caucuses. Why did the rest of the polls, Steve, get it so wrong?
They didn't screen very well. The poll that you guys did, if I remember right, if you said you weren't going to definitely caucus, you guys eliminated them right away. So if anything, you might have more tightly screened it, but you erred on the side of caution. And so, you know, the Des Moines Register, which is dramatically overrated, as I have stated and pointed out in numerous recent examples, they said that 20% of active voters in Iowa were going to vote. That's 386,000 people, just a bit outside, as the great prophet Bob Uecker once said. I mean, these turnout projections were way, way off, and they didn't understand who was going to come. That's why organization is key. But here's the thing, guys. It's not just the caucuses where they're struggling. Last November, the Real Clear Politics polling average said Matt Bevin was going to lose the Kentucky governor's race by 5, and he won by 9. Before that, they said Ken Cuccinelli was going to lose by 7 to 11 points in Virginia, and he lost by 2. They underreported the size of the Republican victories and gains in the 2014 midterm elections. This public polling industry as a whole is crumbling. And what's really unfortunate about it is it's what drives most news cycles. Most people in our line of work don't do any reporting. We just take a poll, and then we sit around with a bunch of pundit losers discussing what it doesn't mean just to make ourselves sound important for 4 hours. And then when the results come in and people actually vote and they don't do what we told them they were going to do, we then sit around in our networks and call them a bunch of rubes and idiots.
Well, of course, we got the polls right, and but Steve, that's why we bring you on. Someone else who had some comments about this, our own CEO, Chris Ruddy. He wrote an op-ed on our parent website, Newsmax.com. Chris says Mr. Trump lost Iowa largely for one reason. He crushed Ben Carson. He wrote, quote, Trump used his verbal powers and eviscerated Carson. Carson's poll numbers collapsed, his campaign staff quit, and his fundraising machine ground to a halt. But it was a Pyrrhic victory for Trump because the Carson voters didn't back him. They switched to Cruz. Is there something to the Ruddy theory?
There is, and no question about that. And you could tie that also to the fact that Cruz was able to destabilize and defeat, sort of in a sub-primary, if you will, Rand Paul, Bobby Jindal, Scott Walker, Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum. His campaign organization and machine didn't allow any of those other candidates to get a footing in Iowa. And so he practically eliminated them before we even got to the caucuses. And then I agree that that Trump's destabilization against Carson also doomed him and worked against him.
Steve, before we let you go, we only have a short time remaining. I have to ask about the Democratic caucuses, where it took until about 1:30 Eastern time for Mrs. Clinton to be declared the official winner. Steve reports our 6 precincts were decided by literally a coin toss. I mentioned that earlier. Is that the standard operating procedure, or is that how things are just done in her world, so to speak?
Yes is the answer to your question to both. It is standard operating procedure, but let's face it, guys. Those missing voters last night are not the first people to go missing when they go cross the Clintons. I think we all know there's precedent for that.
Well, let me follow up on this, Steve, because I'm intrigued. You know, having been through the political process and dealt with some pretty ruthless leftists, last night, was this by design? Because some of the stories were written up that there were well-intentioned outsiders, no one was leading, so somebody would step forward in the Democrat caucus to count the votes, and then just suddenly 60 caucus goers are missing in the totals. Was this by design or by well-meaning amateurs? 20 seconds.
Well, I think it's the latter, especially when their turnout was way down. I think this is Hillary machine chicanery all the way.
Hillary machine chicanery. There's a certain ring to that phrase because we've seen evidence of it time and again. Steve Deace from Iowa. We thank you. Again, the name of Steve's book, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again. There's his book. You can judge it by its cover and what he had to say to us. And you heard what he had to say. Agree or disagree? Why don't you send me your comments at newsmaxtv.com/comments. Up next, Ken Blackwell and David Goodfriend talk about Iowa. Stay with us.